Hi everyone, I'm Asha, as Anshul introduced. It's really great to be in the company of so many young coders. Like Anshul mentioned, I was in grade 5 when I started coding, and I haven't stopped since. And I was actually just thinking a little bit about how I started coding right before this conversation. Um, and I sound like an 80-year-old as I say this, but actually, like the first program theoretically that I wrote was on paper, and I wrote that like several times over before I actually had access to a full-fledged computer. I mean, not that I didn't have access to computers, but before I had the chance to actually like see it run on a screen. Um, and there's benefits of that, and there's disadvantages of that. But I think you're also lucky to be able to actually have such great opportunities like Can K-12 to be able to be in the company of so many other people that code with you, to have access to all of these mentors that help you code, and just understand like what the world of coding is like. Yeah.
Thanks, Asha, and welcome. I think before we start asking you questions, just tell us a bit about your current context. Where are you? Why is there all this writing in a giant whiteboard behind you? Why is there even a giant whiteboard behind you? Tell us a little bit about just your current environment.
Yeah. I'm currently at home in Hyderabad. And the reason that this is where I work because everything is remote right now. It's just a little office space. And the reason there's a lot of scribbling in the whiteboard behind is because I'm currently trying to build an organization in education and education that serves low-income communities specifically. And so what you see behind there is just a bunch of ideation and brainstorming of different ideas about what are the different problems you could solve, how do you go about solving it, who are the various people involved that we have to be interacting with to be able to solve that problem. So that's just a giant load of
Awesome.
thinking.
I'm sure we'll talk more about it, but I got excited because I saw the word code written there. So clearly, Ashna, even today, so many years later, is thinking about how she can share coding with more kids in India. And that's been a very important part of Ashna's journey. In many ways, she lived a parallel life to me. And when I was in college, I also started teaching other kids to code. And when I met Ashna, I was quite excited to see that she had arrived at that similar set of activities and conclusions when she was in college. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I think a lot of our audience today is young. So grade 1 to grade 5 represents, I think, a big chunk. Let's actually start by asking you questions about your school days. And just take us back to those times where you were in middle school, right? 5th grade would put you in middle school, at the start of middle school. Tell us about what you were doing those days. What were your activities, your common activities? And then tell us how you discovered coding. So you said you wrote your first lines of code on a piece of paper without even having a book or any sort of thing. Why? Who does that, right? So tell us about what you were doing in school and then how you ended up writing code on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
In grade 5.
So I was in grade 5, and I think I was like most other kids in that, well, I'd go to school, and then my parents had lined up a bunch of extracurricular activities for me that ranged from like painting classes to I played a lot of basketball. And there was dance. So there was all of these like various extracurriculars that I did after school. But I was fortunate enough to go to a school that actually introduced me to coding. And again, I went to a school that had a computer lab, but because I was in 5th grade, the computer lab had to be shared amongst like many grades. And so we didn't get to use the lab as much as like the other grades did. And so the first time that I was introduced to coding, it was a teacher teaching us how to build websites with HTML. And she would just, explain things on a whiteboard. Yep. And we would actually just write the code in our notebooks before we actually got to like test it on a computer, because we would probably go to the computer lab.
To visualize that. When was the first time you got to see your website running with that code?
a couple of months after I actually wrote the
Wow.
code, and we would be so excited to actually, because we would like keep writing like programs in our notebook, and we would get access to this lab maybe once in a month, maybe. Like it was really uncertain when we would get access, so we had to have all our programs like ready to go, so we could just get to the computer, quickly test it out, and then we had like 20 minutes with that computer, and like watch it come alive, and then go back to class.
Awesome. I can imagine that. I think after you've been learning something, you don't know why you're learning it. You don't know what it does. Like kids, imagine if you were to learn coding in your Camp 12 classes without building projects. I think that's what Ashna is describing in the early few months. And then she actually got to build the website. Imagine that first time you coded something, the kind of feeling that, wow, this is a superpower where I can actually make my own website. So Ashna, tell us about some of the projects you made, not just in class, but some of the projects you made for fun when you were discovering the superpower of coding.
Yeah, so my first introduction to coding, like I said, was HTML. And I think because it was like websites and whatnot, I think I was very, very taken up like with the idea of hyperlinking. And the nerd that I was, I think I basically took, and because we did a lot of this offline, I took like I think environmental science, like EVS textbook in 5th grade, and like took a couple of the chapters that we were reading and kind of like created like a giant mind map of it, and like create all of these links with it, right? And what I did was essentially like created a website, like an e-textbook is what people would call it right now, and like kind of hyperlinked all of the various concepts that I was learning. And I, in retrospect, actually, that just helped me like learn the material better. But because I was just like, wow, like you could link all of these different things, and the way that my mind kind of, thought of all the subjects was also like linking all of these subjects. So I kind of used hyperlinking and what I was learning in school and combined both of them and created a website.
Did you share that with your classmates?
I did. And it's a very funny story because like once I was exposed to like how to like run my code on the computer, I had a computer at home, and I came back and started working and building on my website. But then I was really excited to show it to my friends and my teacher, and I was like, well, most of my code is at home, and back then I didn't know how to like share code across like, and actually like, and there wasn't internet at school, so actually would
share code back then.
I had no idea. And so I was like, and we used to write HTML code in like Notepad. And so I would basically take the entire text editor, like the Notepad file on a pen drive, and then, even sneak code in the computer lab and then show it to my teacher eventually.
So kids, you guys, when you learn on Camp 12, you get a project portfolio. Automatically, your projects get uploaded onto your profile, and you can just share it. Those of you who did Uno Coder, it was really easy to share your project in the competition. And there's so many ways today where you can share your projects with people, and we allow that on our platform. Back when Ashna was learning to code and when I was learning to code, that actually is a very normal situation where you have to send the file and say, hey, you run it on your side, and I'll just send you the code file. There's no way to let someone click a link. I mean, there was, but as kids, as teachers won't teach you that. As kids, you don't really know those ways of how do you deploy your code to a web server so that others can access it. This was all, that was advanced stuff. And so we wouldn't know how to do that. This was actually how we shared code. For me, I had a similar story, actually. I think I started learning to code and design at a young age only because I was doing nerdy things like you, and I was trying to build things so I could learn, and so that I could make my homework a little easier. So I had, math class where the math was really repetitive for homework. Those worksheets where you would have to solve equations of a certain kind. I said, what if I can build something where I just type in the equation? Back then, I wasn't thinking about computer vision and looking at the textbook and automatically figuring out the text, but can I type in the equation and then just it solves it for me, but it also tells me the steps of how to solve it so I can write it in my worksheet, just copy paste. And I actually built things like that, and I shared it with my friends. It was very hard to share back then. And I remember for biology class, we were learning mitosis and meiosis. So I coded an animation of how that works just to teach myself, and I gave it to my teachers. And I think if things had been easier to share back then, it would have been just a lot easier for your product to go viral and my product to go viral. But back then, I remember teachers would literally put things on a DVD and give them to kids, or put things in a pen drive and give them to kids. What a different world back then. So let's keep going, talking about your school days. This was in middle school. You started learning to code in the school environment, and you got excited about hyperlinking and building websites, and you digitized textbooks, which, by the way, is like a $1 billion opportunity, and even today is something that large publishers are doing. So you kind of stumbled upon that opportunity just very organically, and that's awesome. Yes, thank you, Adyant. I think we're all proud nerds, right? So hashtag something that we should all proudly wear. And you know what? Nerds are awesome, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. That's my point of view. In your life, people will call you a nerd, meaning it in all sorts of ways, but embrace it, right? If you like to build things, people get jelly, and then they call you a nerd. There you go. I like the spirit here. Raziuddin is saying I'm a nerd too. That's awesome. So kudos to nerds, guys. Give a round of applause to being nerds. Young nerds. Awesome. Good. Be proud. So let's keep going down this whole nerd trajectory that we're talking about. So tell us more about high school days. Like what kind of stuff did you start coding as you got a little older and went into high school? By the way, any high schoolers here? Raise your hand if any of you are in 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. Yeah, we have a few people raising their hand. Okay. Rudradev is in high school. All right. Who else? Just chat on the side. Okay. Chat on the side if you're in grade 7, 8, or 9. 7, 8, or 9. So we have Raj, 7. Okay, we've got some 9th graders. Awesome. We've got an 11th grader. All right, there we go. So guys, now we're talking about Ashna's journey before going to Stanford University in the US. Let's understand what she did in high school. So go ahead and take us back to those days and tell us more about what that was like.
Yeah, so I started with website building and then continued on. I think we did a bunch of animations using Flash, and then we learned like very introductory programming in a variety of different languages, like C++. There was Java. There was even C for a bit, I think. And then finally, I think I took CBSE. I went to a school that was CBSE throughout my school. And so in 11th and 12th grade, we had to pick an elective, and my elective was IP, which is informatics practices, which is which was computer science basically. And the core of what we learned there was Java. And so I remember building another application, and this was when I was applying to colleges and whatnot, and I needed my teachers to to enter my grades onto my college app correctly. And I realized I got more insight into the systems that they had back then to actually maintain grades and keep grades. And coincidentally, that was also the time when my school just handed out a laptop to all of our teachers to kind of help with their with classes and curriculum design and maintaining grades and whatnot. And I was also applying to colleges at the same time, and I realized it was I just realized how hard it was for a teacher to actually maintain marks and grades over many years. And so we would also we also had to do a capstone project in 11th and 12th grade for a school. So what I ended up building is basically a system that would help teachers enter grades and maintain grades across different years and across different subjects. And
was it a website?
No, it was all offline.
Java?
It was Java, yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. So it had a graphical user interface that they could interact with?
Yeah, nice. I was super, super proud having built it. But the interesting point was that once I showed it to my teachers, they were all very proud. But I think that was also my first entry into understanding design and understanding the importance of how it should, how your program or app or whatever you're building should look, and making it easy for teachers. And it worked great. And I was so much of my efforts were focused on making it work accurately and function without any problems and bugs and whatnot, that I obviously didn't care at all about how it looked and how easy or not it was to use. And then I handed it out to my teachers, and they were like, this is really, really great, and we like love what you've done for us, but then this is really hard for us to use. And so so it was my first like, okay, yeah, well, that makes sense. And like what you make and build and create is also a lot about how it looks and how easy it is for you to use, as opposed to just functioning like flawlessly at the back end.
Hey, so let's take a moment here and zoom out and talk to the kids. So kids, when you learn coding, I think you've realized that if you're building something that other people need to use, you have to think not just about the implementation, the logic and the algorithm, but what we call the UI and the UX, the user interface and the user experience. Raise your hand if you know these terms, UI and UX. Have you heard about them in your classes? If you guys, so I saw some people saying, hey, they learn to code in Thunkable. You guys make mobile apps, Android apps. If you don't design the app, remember there are two tabs, there's like design and there's code. Even when you use Hatch to learn coding for 3D applications, there's design and there's code. When you're working on projects that you want other people to use or games that you want other people to play, you have to think about not just the code, but also the design. And Ashna is sharing her journey as a first-time coder in high school, where she built something that, again, she stumbled upon a $1 billion opportunity of learning management systems and class management systems, which today are things that companies exist to solve. But back then, as an early coder, she focused more on the coding rather than on the design. And that's something that I think every coder goes through that journey. And it's only by learning to build stuff for real people do you get better at that aspect, because you give them something to use and you realize that, hey, I didn't focus on the design. And next time you do it, you get better at the UI UX. And it's just a journey. By the way, Ashna, while you were speaking, people were typing in code on the chat thread. So it was a fun thing. We'll send you the chat thread later. They were kind of commenting in code, so console.log, and then like what they wanted to say and statements and stuff like that. So it's a fun crowd here. Great. So Ashna, we've talked a bit about high school, specifically the kinds of projects you build. Let's talk a bit about this college decision, first of all, like how you first of all decided to choose the US university system. And then talk to us about what that Stanford admission process is like, because if there are any parents listening to this now or who will watch this video later, I'm sure they're curious. Now, we haven't hosted a Stanford guest in the past, and I think this audience may not know much about Stanford University. Like, tell us a bit about why go abroad and how did that actually happen? Like, how does one get into Stanford? By the way, I think Stanford is like one of the most selective universities in the world, and probably more so than Harvard and MIT. I can't remember. It's just super selective university. It's crazy hard to get in, especially from India. And like what Ashna achieved is actually a very rare thing. And let's actually find out how that happened.
Yeah, I think I knew that I wanted to go to the US to study because for starters, I think my family, I was from a family that was privileged enough to have the means to actually consider sending me abroad. So that was like fantastic. But the reason I wanted to go was that I think most Indian colleges, the way I understand it, and things are changing now, but most Indian colleges, especially the engineering colleges, require you to like know what you want to do and what you want to pursue before you actually get into it. So if you're getting into an IIT, you probably get into it knowing that you will do mechanical engineering or computer science or industrial engineering and whatnot. And even though I loved coding, I wasn't entirely sure and 100% sure that this is what I wanted to do. And so I wanted the flexibility to basically be able to explore a variety of different subjects before I actually committed to a particular field. Back then, I liked computer science, but I was also getting a lot into like design and graphic design. And so I was considering maybe should I get into that line, should I get into product design and whatnot. That changed after I went to Stanford, but the one big thing that called out to me about US University was the flexibility of having like up to 2 years of choosing a major or a field that you want to specialize in. And then I think for me, I had an older sister that also went to a a very elite university in the US. And so I almost had to I had big shoes to fill. And for me, my parents were like, well, you either get into these best universities, or you consider other options closer to home, like Singapore, or maybe even UK. And so for me, it was either this or it's UK or Singapore. And so obviously Stanford was my number one choice. And the reason it was number one was because one, it was what's called a liberal arts college, which gives you, it's a more holistic approach to education. And so we have a very a top-notch engineering department, but we also have really, really fantastic departments in the humanities and in history and philosophy and religious studies and whatnot. So being a person who really wanted to explore all of this, that really appealed to me. And the other part of Stanford was that it was in Silicon Valley. And for those of you who don't know what Silicon Valley is, it's where all of the big companies like Google and Microsoft, maybe not Microsoft, Google and Facebook, and not even Facebook actually.
No, they're based there. So Google is based there. Facebook wasn't back in your time, but I mean, had they moved to Menlo Park? I can't remember. Yeah, all those companies are there, and there's a ton more. Microsoft's the only exception. So Apple is there too. Microsoft's the only exception. Microsoft is up there in Redmond and Seattle, but they have offices in the Valley. So yeah, being at Stanford, you are literally in the heart of tech innovation, and that's absolutely true. I felt that when I was growing up there as well.
And so I think I wanted to feel that being in the amidst all of these big companies, feeling that entrepreneurial spirit that people talk about. I think there was something really appealing about that.
Stanford is known for balancing really well across entrepreneurship, liberal arts, and engineering. So if you are looking for engineering education and a computer science education, which is first class and exposes you to these other things, these other elements, it's by far the most entrepreneurial school, the most entrepreneurial college out there, where everybody's just building companies. And so let's actually talk about that. So you built something when you were at Stanford as well. So guys, we're going to fast forward a bit into Ashna's journey at Stanford. Let's talk about two things, one of which I know about and one of which I don't know about. I know that you started something called Girls Code Camp at Stanford. What I don't know is what other stuff you built at Stanford using the power of code. So I would love to hear about both. And since we're already talking about using code to build stuff, maybe talk about any projects you built you want to share at Stanford as a coder, because you studied computer science at Stanford. So I'm sure through classwork you were building things. And typically classes at Stanford have awesome opportunities to do hackathons and projects in class. And so talk about any projects you built that you're especially proud of or you are open to sharing in Stanford. And then we'll talk about why you decided outside of Stanford to build your own nonprofit organization to teach coding to young kids. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll start by talking about the different coding projects that I did in college. One of them was related to your first coding journey, and first coding app was was a project that I built at a hackathon, which was basically which you could basically draw up random, you could wave with your hand random curves, and the computer or the program will tell you what the equation of the curve is. And awesome. The larger use case for it would be, hey, would be to learn equations of a parabola or equations of different curves that we do in high school, for example, and helping teachers and making it fun and playful for little kids to learn math by just kind of waving their hands around and understand and exploring, okay, well, if you draw a curve that's like this, what does it look like? If you make it a little taller, what changes, and what part of the equation changes?
A sensor, like a Microsoft Kinect kind of thing as an input device?
Yeah, okay. Exactly.
That's awesome. And was this for a math course or for a computer science?
This is for a hackathon.
For a hackathon. Wow. And that's amazing. So you had to do it in 1 day or 2 days. What was the time frame?
It was 48 hours, so 2 days.
Cool. And did it work?
It did. I think I think it was like there's a company called Wolfram Alpha that actually like loved it, and then I think there was a prize that Wolfram Alpha. The thing with these hackathons
Oh,
is that
nice.
there's a lot of free like giveaways, and so a lot of companies just give out free stuff, and so
You won the
Wolfram
world.
Alpha. Exactly.
That's great. That's great. I can totally imagine them integrating it at some point in their system. That's cool. I don't know if these kids are old enough to know the this whole concept of a parabola and how why approximating a curve is hard and useful. But some of the older ones in high school might know a little bit about those equations and how it's a really nerdy, fun thing to do. So congrats on winning that hackathon and that award. Let's talk about what you were doing outside of Stanford at this point. So so guys, Ashna started this organization, which similar to Camp K12, actually had this mission of teaching kids to code. And Ashna, take us to those days when the idea first came to your mind. Why did you like what is Girls Code Camp? Start there. And what's the story of it?
Yeah. I think so. When I first entered Stanford and took a bunch of computer science classes, I noticed there was this entire movement of, encouraging women in technology, encouraging women to take up more computer science classes. So professors, talked about it and addressed it in our first class and said, hey, if you're a woman, like, thank you for being here. And we're going to try to create an environment that's, makes it comfortable for you to take up more coding classes. There were a ton of student groups on campus that were just specifically for women in STEM or women in engineering fields or women in computer science. And there was a ton of like mentorship, especially for like as a woman in computer science. And that made me reflect on my journey as a woman myself. And I realized in high school too, like I was one of the only two girls in my computer science class. So the class that I took in 11th and 12th grade, like the computer science elective that I took, there were just me and another girl in a class of 30. And then I started thinking about, well, like, I didn't realize it back then, but a lot of my friends didn't take computer science because, well, like their friends didn't take computer science, and they didn't take computer science because they, they either thought it was too mathy or they thought they weren't good enough or, wasn't their cup of tea. And so what I wanted to do is come back and kind of expose women to like what coding can be, and that it doesn't necessitate like, yes, it involves math, but it doesn't, just because you're not good at math or you feel like you're not good at math doesn't mean you can't do computer science. But it's just if you like art, or if you like games, or if you like more hands-on stuff, like computer science can enable all of that and can be a means to do that as well. And so that's why I started Girls Code Camp, where I would come back and kind of host these different types of workshops for young women to be exposed to the possibilities of what you could do with coding and what coding really can be.
Got it. And some of the kids that are messaging on the side asking questions. One of them said, "Hey, I can't understand anything." Divyansh, we'll just recap it for you so that we can explain. Divyansh, what grade are you in? Right, what grade you're in? I'll try to summarize in your grade. So look, Ashna has gone through the same journey that I went through at Camp K12, which is realizing that coding is awesome, and coding shows you that you can build anything that you want to build. And she saw that young girls in schools in India don't get a chance to code, and they don't get a chance to build things. And she thought that this would be one of the most important ways to spend her time. And so she decided to start this organization called Girls Code Camp. She came back to India and she started teaching coding at schools. Am I right, Ashna? You started partnering with schools and started running these workshops.
Yeah.
For girls. Were these all girls' schools, or they were just normal?
They were co-ed schools.
Okay, co-ed schools, but the workshops were for young girls. So, what kinds of technologies and projects were you teaching these young girls?
Yeah. The idea was to make young women understand that there is not one way of coding, and you could use code and use technology to enable any interest that you have. And so we did all kinds of workshops. We did code workshops that built websites. We did workshops that built mobile apps. We did workshops that went beyond just coding on a computer and took coding like outside of the computer, where they built like gaming consoles, for example, um, and to basically bring home the fact that like coding doesn't have to be in a computer. There's a lot of like it doesn't have to be intangible. There are a lot of tangible things that you can build that are also powered by code. And so we did all of those types of workshops to
I
basically.
think Navya had asked a question about the tools that you guys use. Navya, are you here? We can unmute you. Let me search your name and unmute you. So Navya, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. You wanted to know what coding platforms that ma'am has learned and used, and also, so I want you to ask your question, Navya. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, ma'am, my question was that have you ever used Scratch or AI Playground to make your projects? And was it easy for you or you feel better using them?
Yeah. Unfortunately, when I started coding, there wasn't Scratch around, although I would have loved to have it around. But when I started Girls Code Camp and taught the coding workshops that I was just talking about, we used Scratch, we used MIT App Inventor. We didn't teach AI, but I have taught other workshops using AI Playground. So I think those are like really, really great platforms to like start coding and like learn about um, how to begin coding.
Yeah. What have you made using Scratch? While you're at it?
Me?
Any projects? Yeah. I think a lot of our young developers here are actually Scratch developers. So let's actually ask for a show of hands. Kids, raise your hand if you are a Scratch developer, if you've coded using Scratch. Raise your hand if you've coded using Scratch. I know many of you have. Raise your hand if you've coded using Hatch for 3D games. Okay, all right. Raise your hand if you've made mobile apps, App Inventor, MIT App Inventor or Thunkable. All right. And then some of the older kids, Python, AI. All right, come on, Shivansh and Rudradev, what have you coded? Rudradev, Python, JavaScript. I'm guessing it's one of these websites, maybe. All right, I won't put you on the spot, but I'm guessing one of those applies to you. But yeah, so Ashna, tell us about one of the projects that you remember building on Scratch, whether it be to teach the girls at Girls Code Camp or for fun, so that these kids can get a sense of what kind of stuff you used to teach.
Yeah. The first program that I actually built at a introductory course at Stanford was the game Brick Breaker. It's basically like there's ton of bricks and there's a paddle and you hit the ball and the bricks disappear.
Yeah.
And we built that.
Just the question coincidentally he says, "Ma'am, did you make a game when you were young?" And so at Stanford, you actually made Brick Breaker. By the way, guys, you learned to make Brick Breaker and ping pong in your Camp Kidwell curriculum, and Stanford also teaches that at a college level. So you guys are super coders. Just keep that in mind. Ashna, any other games that you've created in your coding life?
A ton. I think there's it just like I wouldn't name them because we were just my own games. But one game was Dance Dance Revolution.
Okay, that's awesome.
The little game that you go to like arcade places and play when you have to like step on different things and dance. We built that using Scratch. We built like a version of Dance Dance Revolution, which was Guitar Hero. We built a bunch of like maze games.
You guys have made maze games as well, kids. I remember you've done that even in your demo class.
Ping pong.
Yeah. Notice, guys, there's a lot of parallels, right? The things you're learning to do at this young age are things that are quite common in basics of computer science, even as you get older, and quite universal. So you guys are learning a universal skill and a superpower. So Ashna, going back to those Stanford days, for the parents that will watch this later, and for kids who are older, like talk a bit about how the culture in a US university is different from a culture in a Indian university, and just what are some elements of that US university life that you think we ought to bring to the Indian university life?
Yeah, I think the main difference that stands out to me between Stanford and maybe Indian colleges here is the fact that I think colleges there give you a whole lot of like choice and agency in whatever you do. So whether that be it starting with choosing what you want to pursue, you have like 2 years to do that. Whether it's the classes that you take, I think in India, colleges are very much an extension of school in that you're told exactly what classes to take, and maybe there are a couple of electives that you can choose, but for the most part, you have a very scripted curriculum. In the US, there are some requirements for sure, but for the whole lot of it, you can kind of choose whatever. You can mold your own degree and kind of choose whatever classes that you want, and you have a lot of flexibility in which departments and which subjects that you choose from,
Right.
and even like within a particular class, like I have a lot of flexibility in showing in doing like in doing projects. So for example, if for like an end of term paper, I don't necessarily just have to write a paper to demonstrate understanding of whatever I've learned. I could write up a program for it. I could make a video for it. I could like just come up to class and do a presentation. So I think there's a lot of flexibility. Like as long as you're learning and exhibiting, I mean, as long as you're like demonstrating the skills that you've learned in class and showing that you're learning, there's a lot of flexibility in how you do that, which I think is not as, it's much more rigid in colleges here. And I think colleges here need to
bringing that element of choice to the Indian system, I think is what you're talking about, where you shouldn't have to declare computer science or something else at a young age, or even in school declaring streams. And in the US, you had a chance to explore a lot more and do things that match your skills and your interests. And yeah, I've gone through that US system as well. So I agree with Ashna here that there's that element of exploration, which the US university system really emphasizes. And so if that's something that you care about and want to prioritize, it can be quite exciting to go. Why don't we open it up to questions from kids? I've been seeing a lot of questions. So kids, I want you to raise your hand using the Zoom feature. I can see several of you have raised your hand. So if you don't have a question, unraise your hand. And yeah, okay, you can do it visually as well. We'll start with Prasanna, and then we'll go to Divyansh. Okay, Prasanna, Divyansh, and then we'll go to Shivansh. And then I would like a girl to ask a question. So Prasanna, go ahead. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Sorry, I just muted you again. One more time. There you go.
Hello, sir. Hello, ma'am. I just want to ask a question, as you asked, sir, that what is the main difference between education system in India and US? And it is believed that education system in India is top in the world. But why India is in creating global tech companies as in US?
Wow. Ashna, I'll let you take that one. Why isn't India creating global tech companies the way the US system is, if it is true that the Indian system is such an aggressive and rigorous education system?
I think engineers from India are top notch, and what we do really well is like when given a program to build, we do that like flawlessly. I think my suspicion, although like if I figure this out, might as well go and do it. My suspicion for why Indian colleges we are not producing global top companies is because a lot of Indian colleges, like I said, don't give you the flexibility to kind of pursue things like outside of just schoolwork. And I think the schoolwork, like you said, is so rigorous and so much that so much of your time is just spent in preparing for those exams and preparing, just doing schoolwork, that you don't necessarily have a lot of time to pursue and kind of do your own thing. And I think it's not just time, but I think it's providing the right atmosphere. So for example, at Stanford, like I said, right, we had a ton of speakers come to campus all the time to tell us about their journeys to becoming entrepreneurs, just like we are right now at CAT K-12 Talks. We had a lot of student groups that were of people who wanted to start their own companies and start their own organizations. So I think there aren't as many opportunities available like that in Indian colleges to get the right mentorship, to get the right opportunities, to be able to think of ideas and build your own organization as there are in the US colleges. And so I think if Indian colleges started providing more of those opportunities, I think we might have more Googles and Microsofts in India.
Yeah, and the good news is I think things are changing as the internet comes to India, and as everyone from parents to kids get global exposure, as I think the unorganized set of activities beyond the IITs get more common and more exciting, I think we will have global companies, and Camp12 hopes to be one of them. But I think we will have global companies being built out of India. I think it's just a culture of exploration and risk taking, and not having to run the rat race, that allows for that creativity and allows for that creation, which can become really big. So I think we will, in this next decade, see those companies, and you guys will be the ones building them. So that's the most exciting thing. You guys will be the ones building them. So hey, Shivansh, do you still have a question? Just nod if you do. I can unmute you. Okay, and then we'll go to one of our girl coders here, and then we'll go to Syed, who's raising his hand. And go ahead, Shivansh.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Hey.
Hello, ma'am. Sir,
Hi.
sir, your journey is very inspiring to me. I follow you since last year, and it's very inspiring to see.
Thank you. And you're going to have a similar journey as Ashna and myself, and you guys are all going to have that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right now, you said we will be able to build global companies. I hope I will be one of them.
I hope so too.
Being an entrepreneur. And hello, ma'am. Your journey was also very inspiring. I enjoyed the session. And ma'am, my question is, what do you see the scope of RPA and UiPath in the field of AI?
The scope of what? I didn't understand the acronym. Did you, Ashna?
No, I just heard UI.
Hey, say it one more time.
Robot processing automation, RPA and UiPath in AI field. What will be the scope?
You're asking what is the scope of robot process automation in AI?
Yeah.
That's
And
what you're
UI. And UI?
UiPath, a company in US that
UiPath
follows
is,
this RPA.
Yeah, it's a company that enables this. I've read about it and I've heard about it. It's okay, Ashna, if you don't know about UiPath, but if you have any perspectives on robot process automation in AI, then go ahead and offer those perspectives. It's a specific question.
I actually don't know what RPA is, so maybe you want to take that one.
Yeah, well, Shivansh, let's do this in two parts, okay? I want you, since you're on the stage, to explain what RPA is, and then either Ashna or I will try to respond to your question by just using our general knowledge of how it might fit into the big picture of how AI will unlock new benefits in the next decade.
Yes, sir. Robot processing automation is a platform where you can create robot that reduces normal human works. Like in banks, we have to daily type all the informations about all the person, means how the money is coming, going. That will automatically be controlled by the computer itself. And there will be chatbots option are also available. I have learned that chatbot using RPA. And you can control your own computer. You can ask the computer to remind me at this time. It can send automatic mails to you using RPA, and reduces the normal human work, daily extra work.
A lot of the things you're talking about are general automation, and I don't know if it's robot automation specifically. General automation, you see it everywhere. The reminder systems you use, and even what we teach you in your Camp12 coding classes to very, very early on build a chatbot like Siri or Alexa. But when you talk about robotics specifically and robot automation, it's about taking some of the physical labor that human beings do and making that more productive, in which case you enhance the human being, or in replacing it so that human can then go do something that is higher value. Right. And a perfect example that you may not know, but it happened while I was at MIT, Amazon, this e-commerce company that all of you know, one of the top 5 biggest companies in the world, benefited a lot from what I imagine is robot process automation, literally in the sense of the word, because Amazon and e-commerce companies have warehouses, right? They have warehouses which have to keep all. So let's say you order something like, I don't know, what have you ordered from Amazon, Shivansh, recently? Whatever you are allowed to share or want to share.
A mobile phone?
Mobile phone. So mobile phone doesn't go to you directly from the manufacturer, right? It is sitting in some warehouse at Amazon, and then they will ship it to you from that warehouse. Now, can you visualize how big this warehouse is? Because imagine how many people are actually ordering things from Amazon every day, right? So which city are you in, Shivansh?
I'm in UP, Gorakhpur.
Gorakhpur. So let's say that
Gorakhpur.
in Gorakhpur, in the same second, there are thousands of orders, or in the same minute, there are thousands of orders. Let's just take that example. They all have to get delivered to Gorakhpur. And so there are warehouses that have these items that people have ordered, and they have to end up in the homes of all the people in Gorakhpur. So this is a very physical operation. And a human being, back in when I was at MIT, would go to the Amazon warehouse, would walk around the shelves, and would look at, okay, he ordered a mobile phone. Which mobile phone did he order? Okay, my directory says it's in this shelf. They would literally walk in the warehouse the way you walk in a grocery store, the way you walk in a market before COVID, right? And you walk around, you find the item in the aisle, you put it in like a box, and then goes for packaging, and it gets sent to you, right? Imagine how long that takes. And when you start having thousands of orders coming from a certain city and millions of orders coming to that same warehouse in that same time, a human being is a very slow way of both organizing the warehouse as well as retrieving items from the warehouse. So to me, when I hear automation in the robotics sense, one thing that Amazon did when I was at MIT was they actually announced a big acquisition of a company that was a robotics company. And that robotics company, I think it was called Kiva Systems. I'm forgetting the name of it. I think it was KIVA, Kiva Systems. We had actually studied robotics automation. And back then, they made a big acquisition of that company because that company had figured out how to have a robot automatically go to the right place in the warehouse, have a little arm that retrieves the item, and it did it like 100 times faster than a human. So now, does that mean Amazon has to fire those humans? No, it means that those humans can do other things that are in the value chain of getting that to your doorstep, such as maybe labeling it or something else. And the warehouse can be a lot more efficient, right? So that is an example of how Amazon's able to give you Prime, Amazon Prime. Amazon Prime would not have been possible had they not had robotics automation, right? And so these kinds of innovations, which are, I would say, in that space of artificial intelligence, given how big artificial intelligence is, can create so much value for human beings. And in that sense, I don't really think they compete. They kind of improve the size of the pie and the overall prosperity that everyone can achieve. And so when you ask what is the scope of it, I think the scope of it is to improve the productivity of human beings' lives. And this is an example of how it did that. Now, in the interest of time, let's go to another speaker. Thank you, Shivansh. So I want one of the girl coders here to ask a question first. So I'm looking at Ishal, I'm looking at Sanvi. Any of you have any questions for Ashna, fellow girl coders? All right. Anyone? Harshika, do you want to ask a question? Your dad is behind you. Yeah, Harshika wants to ask a question. Awesome. Harshika, I'm going to unmute you. Okay, unmute yourself, please. Here, I've asked you to unmute yourself. Let's see if you are able to.
Hello.
Yes. Hello.
Hi,
Yeah,
Ashika.
I want to ask one question that how can we create a big project? Mean a group project.
A group project and a big project. What grade are you in, Harshika?
Mean how can we make one usable project that India can use helping everyone?
I love the question. And I want to know what class you're in. Which class are you studying in right now?
In
Third
Yeah.
class. Okay, so she's 2 years younger than you were when you started coding, Ashna, and she wants to build a project that changes India, right? Right, Harshika? How can you, so that's a good question. I think, Ashna, why don't you talk about how at that age, how they can start building things that really change the world?
Yeah. Harshika, can I ask you one question? What have you built a program so far? Have you done any coding and have you built anything so far?
I did the ping pong ball game by my own and changing the places from this place to other place that
Yes.
keep my became
Right. So the reason I asked you that is because my answer to how you might build a big project that India might use is exactly what you're doing right now. Maybe you just built, like, let's say, the ping pong game, correct? That could be a game in itself that you could publish to a website or an app store right now and have people use. Or if you want to build something bigger than that, right? Maybe you want to build on the ping pong game you made, make it multiplayer, make it such that people can log in from everywhere and compete with each other. You have points and rewards and different things. And maybe like very much like other games that you've probably played in your phone, you start with the program you just built, and then you keep at it and you keep building on what you just coded. And I think slowly you'll realize that you just have a full program that many, many, many people can use. So I think my answer is just that you're already there and you're already building something that India can use, and you just have to keep working on it and working on it for many, many days.
Share it with the world is what she's telling you. That ping pong game, give it to your friends and just start sharing everything you make, and your friends will tell you to make it better. They'll say, do this, do that. And in that process of iteration, you're going to build something amazing that people want to use. Congratulations to you, by the way, Harshika, on being a young coder, but also on having the confidence to ask this question. So round of applause for Harshika in 3rd grade, asking such a nice question, having such a big vision at such a young age. So congratulations to you and to your parents as well. I saw Ishal had a question. So Ishal, can we come to you next? Yeah? Okay, I've asked you to unmute yourself. Go ahead. Hey, I can't hear you, Ishal. I can see you talking, can't hear you. Could it be that your mic is not working? And if you want, type the question on the side if the mic is not working, and we can ask it. And also tell us which class you're in. And then Syed will come to you next, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up after that. Ishal, did you type it? Oh, she's doing it. There it is. How can I become like you? I also want to work in Silicon Valley. That's for Ashna. So Ashna, please.
Thank you, Ishal, for your question. I actually did not really work in the Silicon Valley. Well, I worked for a few months, but I'm back in Hyderabad working here. I think the way you might, if you want to work in Silicon Valley, and I think by Silicon Valley you probably mean that, I'm assuming you mean the tech companies at Silicon Valley. I think you're already working towards that by joining Camp K-12 and hopefully building your own programs. So I think you're well on your journey towards working in Silicon Valley right now. What grade are you in, or how old are you? Can you type it? 10? Yeah, so you're exactly where I was. And I think if you just keep at it, and if you want to become a software engineer and then work at a tech company, you could do that. I think it just be like, keep at whatever you're doing. You have a North Star. So I think you just have to like keep motivating yourself, making time for the things you like, and you'll get to where you want to be.
So Ishal, you're the same age that Ashna was when she started coding, except she was coding on paper, and you're building projects and sharing them on your profile. So I would say you're actually more advanced than all of us. And so congratulations on your early start, and just keep doing what you're doing. I think that is the path, because when you are in college, the college life is going to be very different, and they're not going to look at your report card to decide if you should get a job in the Silicon Valley. They're not going to look at your A grade, your B grade, your C grade, your 1 grade, your 2 grade, your 9 grade, your 10 grade. They're going to look at what have you built, what have you done, what are your skills, and you're going to win that competition. You're going to win that race. So congratulations to you on the early start. So last question, one of our super coders, I see him everywhere on CampCodeUp TV and on CampCodeUp Talks and on Discord. So Syed, nice to meet you, by the way. And I'm going to ask you, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, ma'am.
Love to hear.
Hi.
I want to ask that a couple of months before, there was a bug in Google for 1 hour. So they recovered it in maybe 2 hours or 1 hour. So they recovered because they have a manpower, they have a big team. So is it necessary to have us? Is it necessary for me and everyone to have a big team to achieve big goals?
I have an answer to this, but I think Ashna, you can take it first.
Sure. I think it depends on what your goal, like what your goals are and what you mean by big goals. That being said, I think the big companies that you look for were never alone, like an individual person's journey, right? We talk about Elon Musk, we talk about Bill Gates, we talk about Mark Zuckerberg, but all of these people had their team or like, even if it was just 2 or 3 other friends that they coded this with, right? This always started, like, they weren't entirely alone, even though we perceive them to be. And so all of them have very, very large, well, they start with very small teams, but eventually grow to very large teams. So I think I think it's always good to have friends that you're sharing your code with and showing, even if you're not building with them, like, having people to work with, I think that's always a good thing to have, because you're having multiple perspectives, things you might have not considered, they contribute to. So regardless of what you're doing, but actually big or small, I think it's good to have people to work with and contribute and give feedback to what you're doing. Anshul, what do you have to say?
I actually loved that. I think big teams and big companies were once upon a time small. So keep that in mind. Google did not once upon a time have all those people. They just had Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and 2 guys sitting out of a lab publishing a research paper. Do you know the company WhatsApp?
Yes.
WhatsApp, right? You use it.
Yes.
And it's like the biggest messaging tool out there. When Facebook bought them, they were just a team of 50 people. That's it. 50 people with users in like the hundreds of millions of users. And so it doesn't always require a huge team to make something awesome. But then what I really liked about what Ashna said was that I think having 1 or 2 good co-founders or other people or teammates, I think everyone helps each other become better and make the code better. And it's not about debugging. Like you talked about a Google bug and they have a big team. I think that's irrelevant. Right? Bugs will happen everywhere, and you can solve a bug with a team of 2 or with a team of thousands or with just a team of 1. But I think the ideas end up getting sharper when you are bouncing them off of your teammates, and different teammates have different strengths. So Ashna's totally right that a lot of the single person stories that we hear generally had another person that supported them. So for example, do you know the story of Steve Jobs and Apple? Steve Jobs had Steve Wozniak, and Steve Wozniak was the technical guy. Steve Wozniak was the one who actually built the first prototype, right? And we don't celebrate him as much, and I think that's a separate story. But I think that there are each of these companies you've heard about, even Mark Zuckerberg with Facebook, people present him as like a solo success story. He was coding and coding and coding, and boom, it just exploded. But no, he had co-founders, he had teammates. A Stanford graduate from Snapchat is an app that some of you might use, and that was a team of 3 Stanford graduates, maybe 4, and then 1 dropped out, became 3. So if you look at the early stories of these companies, there are oftentimes small teams that together create big things, and then they become big teams. And so you're looking at them when they're big, but once upon a time they were really tiny. And I think you might be able to build it solo, or you might build it as a team. I don't think it is like a requirement of success, but I think what Ashna is saying, and our life experiences have actually shown this to be true, is that having small team of people can amplify your impact.
Okay, sir. One last question that even I Google it, but I didn't got. Now we are using any platform to build our projects, but how this window, on which platform this Windows and Linux and they are built?
Ashna?
They weren't so what you're describing is like operating systems, right? And we're working on on Microsoft and on Linux, but how do you build systems on which we work on. I think it goes down to, well, what platform you build on. Have you heard of something called the terminal? Or it doesn't have to be the terminal, right? Basically, what your computers are doing is just running scripts on top of scripts on top of scripts. So, and there are like high-level languages, and there's like low-level languages. And high-level languages are kind of built on top of low-level languages. So, for an example of a high-level language is like Python, which is very, very similar to English. An example of a low-level language could be C, and which is more closer to how computers might process and understand and talk, and so how I think, to answer your question on what platforms they were built on, they probably just used very, very low-level languages to build systems, and then all of what we run are built on top of that. But maybe Anshul can explain better, because it's a hard question to
I think that's a fair explanation. They're built on low-level languages, and they don't really have platforms. So like Ashna started coding on Notepad. I don't know if you guys even know what Notepad is. Anyone know what Notepad is on a Windows computer, or like TextEdit on a Mac? Yeah. Can you imagine writing code on that without the colorful code, without all the helpful hints? All of that stuff, those platforms came later. Even our Hatch platform, we built it later. Back in the day when I learned coding, I wasn't using Hatch. Hatch didn't exist. I wasn't using Scratch. Ashna was not using Scratch when she was learning coding. We were writing in raw text files. And in the case of people who built Linux and people who built other low-level platforms, I mean, the earliest days, people were not even writing on code. They were like, there was something called, so there was assembly language, which was the lowest of languages. And before assembly language, in Bill Gates' days, there was something even more primitive than that. And it was like marking some things into tape, like writing code on a physical tape that you would then feed into a machine. Coding has evolved a lot. The basic point is this is logic. And at the end of the day, at the level of a computer, it's turning switches on and off at the very, very low level. And you can write that back in the day in a very physical kind of language, and then it's become a digital language with digital interpreters. And each generation makes it easier and easier. Today, we have a whole movement called the no-code movement, which is the idea that you can even code without coding. Right? You can just drag and drop things, and that's a new movement. So there's an evolution. The people who built Linux and the teams that built these operating systems obviously write in lower level languages and lower level platforms. All right, guys, that's all we have time for. Really delighted to see that now the hands are coming up and now you guys are getting excited. I think it just means that next time we do a speaker, we should ask people, we should give more time to all of you to answer questions. By the way, guys, our speaker for next month is going to be an IIT Bombay graduate who's right now building self-driving cars. He was in the Silicon Valley building self-driving cars with Google, and now he's in London building self-driving cars with Google in London. And he kind of had this journey from India to all these different places, working on cutting-edge AI, and as a product manager, and you'll get to ask him your AI and self-driving car questions. So that's for next time, and we will make sure we leave a lot of Q&A time for all of you. Let's give a round of applause to Ashna, our guest, who was a young coder in grade 5 and then is now trying to change how India learns. So congratulations to you, Ashna, on what you do, and thank you for coming to speak to our young coders.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It was so fun to talk to all of you, and just see that everyone's building such cool things at such a young age. So thank you.